الحمد لله نستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله تعالى آله وأصحابه وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome to our webinar on a very important session and very interesting session. This particular session is something which I find when we sort of tend to discuss in various other sort of courses to some degree, attracts quite some interest. So what we decided to do because of that particular reason is to actually have a specific session on this as a webinar, inshallah. Now, let me start by just explaining a couple of things that I will be talking about. So the session is on soulful healing. In essence, what this really means is how the science of tazkiyatun nafs, the purification of the nafs, or the purification of the heart, is an approach that one can use in terms of healing somebody from a solely psychological perspective. Okay, so I'm going to make reference to a couple of things. So let me start by, first and foremost, just talking about some of the things that we'll be talking about today, inshallah. So here you can see, okay. So we'll start off by talking about human journey. We'll talk about fitrah, acquisition, and company, and I'll explain that as I talk about this through the session. Then I'm going to talk about social ills. So this is the environment that we're in. How has this environment impacted us in terms of our fitrah, in terms of the acquisition of behavior and the kind of company that we have taken on? Okay, it's important to understand the background, to understand the social ills in that sense. Then there's something important about the model of self. So Islam has an understanding about models, in the plural, of self. So I'm going to emphasize one particular model, and that is the model of Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah. Okay, so I'm going to explain this from that particular model. Then I will make mention of barriers to human spiritual progression. So there are certain barriers that exist in our lives that prevent us from truly gaining from spiritual progressive sort of influences. Then I will mention shields which maintain protection. So there are certain shields that we can form that maintain a sense of protection against us falling prey to some of the vices that exist in our environment. Okay, and finally, I will then sort of mention something about beliefs, perceptions, and behavior, and how these become a product of that. Now, throughout this understanding, the last three, in particular, barriers to human spiritual progression, shields which maintain protection, and beliefs, perceptions, and behavior, the discourse will more so be about therapy rather than just a theoretical sort of understanding or a model. So, inshallah, do use chat. You can use the Q&A if you want to, either way. And I will try to understand, I'll try to respond to some of your questions, inshallah, as we go through. So, by all means, do ask questions. Now, this is quite a long presentation. There may be a possibility I might not be able to complete it all. However, I will sort of emphasize the important bits throughout the presentation, inshallah. Okay, so let's get down to this journey. So the first issue is about human journey, the fitrah that we talk about, the acquisition and the company. I'm not going to talk too much about the fitrah in terms of the different descriptions, the definitions. That's a whole, a session on its own. But rather, we recognize fitrah on the basis of something that the Prophet ﷺ said, that we are all born in this particular inherent state, which is our fitrah. So in essence, if we remain on fitrah, and the closest we associate to this particular state of fitrah, then we are more likely to be a state of ma'soom. Ma'soom is a state which is sinless, a state which is pure, a state which usually would make us very driven towards the attraction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so this state is very, very important, to the degree that where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made mention of that we are born in the state of fitrah, and it's usually because of our parents, be they Nasara and Yahud, they may be Christian or Jew, and on the basis of that, that will influence us in our behavior, in our beliefs, in our worldview, etc., etc. The main point to take from this is fitrah is the most pure state that you can be in, okay? And it's your environment that plays a role and influences you in terms of your worldview, in terms of your perceptions, in terms of your understanding of your environment, okay? Now, this particular slide is a slide that I use in one of my sessions on Ihya Ulumuddin. And in essence, what this is Imam Ghazali's model on understanding regarding our relationship with fitrah and our environment, in essence, okay? So he explains in there that the fitrah in itself is an inherent good, okay? So this is something that is considered as hasan, yeah, as good. And there are certain habitual behaviors or habituation that we undergo, and that becomes more prominent, more so when in our early ages, so as toddlers, and we get older as children. Now, what we're really doing is we're just following sort of rituals, sort of habitual behavior, because we don't have the capacity to be able to reason to the degree or to the level where we can put, develop our own particular worldview that is quite detailed. Yeah. So we live on the basis of these habituations, and as we live on these habituations, these are sort of acquired elements that we take on board. So, like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned, that there'll be rituals that your parents will teach you. There are rituals that you will be accustomed to on the basis of your close relatives, your siblings. There'll be certain habituations in regards to you attending nursery, if you attend nursery from a very young age, and the kind of environment that you spend a lot of your time in will have an impact in terms of your general makeup, in the sense of your behavior, your understanding of the world that you're living in, and your sort of sentiments. Yeah. So these are acquisitions. And in essence, what tends to happen is they are learned. And this is the important point here. They are learned, as opposed to fitrah, which is an inherent good. Now, as time goes on, you will start becoming more accustomed to a certain environment. And that will be through your education, it'll be through the company that you take, and that will be your environment, projecting itself on you, and for you to become a part of that environment, in the sense that, the kind of worldview that you take on board will be the worldview that normally is the environment that you're accustomed to. Okay, so this will be an important player in terms of your makeup as a person. So these are important elements. You got the fitrah, you got the acquisition of what you acquire through habituation, and you got the education and the company that basically makes you through your environment. Now, I'm going to make reference to this bit here later on. I'm not too interested at this moment in this, but just a very, very quick point regarding that, recognizing that the more we go in this direction, so the more we become more retrospectively back to our fitrah, the more we go back to our fitrah. In other words, our habituations, they enhance our fitrah, the qualities of our fitrah. The environment we're in nurtures that sense of fitrah through our education and the company. Then we're more likely to remain in an inherent good state. Okay, so goodness is in this direction, whereas badness would be in that direction. Okay, so this is how this diagram sort of portrays it. So the further away you go from fitrah, the more problematic it becomes. Now, to really get yourself into the state of fitrah, Imam Ghazali explains that requires discipline. You need to discipline yourself. Okay, and this is a sense of riyadat. Okay, and then the issue of the thing that sort of strikes us and drives us in this direction, which is away from fitrah, more towards sort of bad, away from our inherent good, is pleasure. So hawa, your desires, your pleasure, these are the things that drive you away from that. Okay, so and clearly this is an important sort of understanding here. But anyway, we'll come back to this slide later on, inshallah. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a bit about social ills. So I don't intend to go into too much detail. Some of you may have heard of some of the things I'm going to mention now, but it's very, very important for us to understand this, to understand how our environment, okay, the habituation, the acquisition, and also the education, the company that we've taken on, how that has impacted us as people. Okay, so here there are three main components: materialism, individualism, and skepticism. So we live in a society now where, postmodern society, there's a great emphasis under mainly those people who live in a capitalist sort of system of economy, and also a sort of extreme liberal type of system of living, which endorses individualism. Capitalists endorses materialism, and also a kind of a society where there is a serious amount of skepticism. Okay, so in essence, what's actually happening there is secularism. So there is a serious amount of secularism in terms of our kind of environment that we're living in. So materialism is driven by this idea of how we capitalize and have profit and material elements in our lives. And I'm talking about material, I'm not just talking about money, mal, but I'm also making reference to material things such as, even from the philosophical sort of perspective. So that is, matter, okay, become very, very important. So matter, body, things like that, they become very, very important part of our understanding. Okay, I'll make reference to this in a short while. Individualism and skepticism. So now let's start with materialism. So even our education system emphasizes modern science, and our modern science is pivotal on this understanding of naturalism. Okay, so naturalism is, in essence, in very simple terms, an approach to science, an approach to seeking the truth about the world that you live in, not its purpose. Purpose is a separate issue because science cannot address that, but rather to seek truth of matter, of the lived world that we're in, through a sort of a epistemic sort of process, which is, in essence, through inductive and deductive processing. I'm not going to go into the philosophy of science. That's a separate discussion altogether. But the main point to say here is we have become very, very accustomed through the way we've been taught and educated, which is quite secular, in the sense that we perceive things solely on the basis of matter. Okay, so the belief that nothing exists except matter and its movements and its modifications. Everything that we perceive, everything that lives in our worldview, in essence, relates, if not majority of it, to things that we can perceive through our sensory perception. So, in other words, if you cannot see it, you can't hear it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, it's not perceptible through our sensory perception, we will not give it much weight. In fact, it will not have much to say in our worldview. Okay, so it's only when it's material and we only relate to physical realities, and they're the things that are important. And these other elements, like spiritual realities, which in essence don't exist in our sensory perception, but rather we learn about spiritual realities because we're talking about realities here, which means it has a high epistemic value, high certainty value. Those kind of concepts are in essence from known as the unseen, or they are the ilm al-ghayb. So the Quran makes reference to that. These are ilm al-ghayb. ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب الذين يؤمنون بالغيب. Those people who believe in the ghaib, in the unseen. In other words, there is knowledge that we have related to those things that we cannot perceive in the world, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about with immense certainty. Like there is a Jannah and there's a Jahannam. There's heaven and there's hell. There is a hereafter. There is a akhirah. Yeah. There is life after death. There is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the concept of Tawheed. There are malaika, there are angels, there are anbiya, there are prophets who have clearly come with their own sharia and an important message, and that is to guide us. Okay, so all these concepts are not things that you're going to be able to pick up through science, but rather they are within the realm of the unseen. So because these things are not issues of a matter nature and physical entities, for that reason, they are, just in essence, elements of knowledge that we have no way of perceiving, through science, in other words. They are negated or they are given less priority. So the way we relate this to our psychology is that our psychological mindset is tuned into the material and physical realities, and it is tuned out of spiritual realities or true realities of the unseen that exist that don't fall within the realm of our sensory perception. Okay, and this is very, very important. So we explain the world through materialistic and empirical lens, through a sense of cause and effect, where Islam has a lot to say about the different theories of cause and effect. For us, we see that if I throw something in the air, it will come down, okay, because of gravity. And we understand that. And that's a reality for us. But we can't comprehend anything beyond that and we see that as a process which is conducive within itself. It does not require a certain external force other than the gravity that we've learned from school, okay, that in essence aligns the sort of motion that exists within that particular object, okay? So hence we recognize just a simple cause and effect. If I punch you, it will hurt you. Simple. If I light a fire, and clearly when I light the fire, it's because of the match I have. That's fire there. It's going to light some substance and it'll go into fire. That's the sense of cause and effect, and that's all we understand. The reality is in the world of Islam, it's not as simple as that, because every particular stage or many stages has a process there which is in the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which explains miracles, explains many different things for us. So angels, the ruh, the soul, and so forth. These are very important concepts. But we have sort of not given that priority now. Our focus is on the material and physical realities. Now, the next element is individualism, and that's happened because of the kind of liberal societies we live in. Okay, so our understanding of liberal society is a society where you are allowed, in fact, it's about maximum pleasure, it's about maximum happiness, and that is what a liberal society aims to achieve. Where reality in Islam, this place that we're in, this abode of dunya, its purpose is not for you to maximize your happiness and your pleasure, but rather it's a place of ibtila, it's a place of test. And hence Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mentions of this. وَلِيَبْلَوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَالنَّقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. Allah says, we will indeed surely test you in many different components, like your life, your wealth, your fruits, your death, and various other things. Okay, the whole test is that the idea is that we can give glad tidings to those of you who are patient through this process, okay, because that's the test. So if you're living in a liberal society, our focus is not going to be about my individual happiness. So it's about individualism, okay? It's about what is important for me. And that understanding is promoted through sociology and psychology. And sociology and psychology exist in virtually every kind of subject that you would study at school, university, any kind of understanding that you'll have, how it's portrayed on media and everything. So these become a very important part of our sort of social infrastructure, in terms of our humanities. So in sociology, there's an inclination towards favoring freedom of action, agency for individuals over collective or state control. So in other words, it's about me living in a free society where I am allowed to do those things I want to do. As long as I'm not directly harming another, then what is the problem? Yeah. So, but yet we don't understand the wisdom of you being an individual who plays a very, very important role as a collective society. Every individual in society matters, and you have a collective of individuals in a society who behave in a certain way, it will impact the whole of society. So we have opposing external interferences upon one's own interest for society. So we are disinterested in close family ties. So we conduct behavior. Our behavior is such, and we prefer our own personal, and even with technologies that we have now, like mobile phones, social media, we're becoming more isolated from others. Then you have psychology, and that is a habit or principle of being independent and self-reliant. Okay, self-reliance. We don't accept authority. The power lies within us. Okay, so this is another important sort of feature that is driven in sort of liberal society. So therefore, you have a sense of independence and self-reliance. That's problematic, because if you're looking at marital relationships and things like that, you need to work as a team. You can't work as an individual. Marital cohesion is affected. Autonomy of decision making is affected because it becomes down to the individual. Whereas families would make collective decisions, even on the health of somebody and the kind of treatment that they receive. Now it's about that one individual, about what they want, regardless of what the rest of the family want. So you can see already that this sort of collectiveness of communitarianism is sort of diminishing. Now, materialism is driven in this sense, impacting us in many of these sort of in sort of various ways. Individualism is another example. Now, let me just give an example of, for those of you who are still skeptical about this and how materialism has truly affected us. I always tell the story about a Moroccan person that I met once who was telling me that, there was a time when my father, he would go to the market, he will sell his products. And once he's made enough money for the day, he would then come home and spend the rest of the day with the family. Now, time has changed. When we go to the supermarket, when you go, we go to the market, we're selling the products, and we make that profit, very early on in the day. We know it's a good business day, so we will stay there later and make as much as we can. You can see already how the mind has changed, yeah, in terms of the materialistic sort of profit-making sort of essence of our mind. Individualism, examples of that are, we've got a great inclination now of putting our children in separate bedrooms. Okay, that itself is nurturing a certain behavior. They're in their separate bedrooms, they've got their own TV, they've got their own mobile phone in a separate room. And then we expect them to get married and share a room with somebody, share their space with someone, Now that is going to be quite a challenge for them, considering all their life they've been, in this situation. So, so you can already and share their, their clothing, wardrobes and things like that, and various other things like that. Now you can already see that that's going to cause problems later on. So this concept is, and also this idea that we don't live in big families in one home. Rather, what we do is we like to split out. We're living in individual families. We don't want to live with our parents. We don't want to live with, our relatives or whatever. Yeah, not even living. We don't want to be in the same sort of location as them, because we want our independence. We want sort of to liberate ourselves from the entanglements of our families. And as a result of that, what you're finding is this behavior where your children are losing that that skill. Well, they never had it, to be honest, but that ability to engage with the elderly, and to also, when they grow a bit older, to engage with the babies and the infants of the family. So they're not able to engage with those individuals. So, and parents are busy working. So historically, grandparents would be the ones who would engage and would engage with children, and they form that sort of relationship. Children would learn immense things from their grandparents. It's degenerating. So we're seeing families now where, clearly we're struggling to take care of our parents when they become old because we've never had that. We're unskilled. We don't know how to relate to elderly people, how to take care of them. We don't understand that. And hence you can see a pattern arising. Skepticism is another important point because this is sort of driven through philosophy. So a skeptical attitude is a doubt as to the truth of something. So we become very skeptical. We don't accept authority anymore. Yeah. So the theory that certain knowledge is impossible, certain knowledge, it's not something that you cannot have 100% truth. These things are problematic for us. So that affects us in many different ways. We have moral skepticism. We question elements, even with the Sharia, of its moral truth. Yeah. Religious skepticism, the existence of God, of nature, skepticism of knowledge, doubt concerning basic religious principles such as immortality. Yeah. That you will die. It's a fact. Yes. But you will have a life hereafter. There's another life after death. We struggle to comprehend that. Is that a reality? Even though we give the lip service that we believe in it. So these elements are very, very important. Why am I spending a lot of time in teaching you this and going on about this? Is because they play a very important role in terms of our makeup that has removed us considerably away from our fitrah. Okay, our fitrah is something which this is contrary to, in terms of materialism, individualism, and skepticism. Okay. So we're going to talk about the model of self, because this is an explanation that Imam Ghazali uses regarding the model of self. And it's quite interesting. So a lot of people find it quite interesting anyway. So I'll just make a bit of a mention of it. One second. Okay. So very briefly, we recognize the ruh, the soul. And this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes reference to many, many times in the Quran, that we have a ruh. Okay. And we also recognize our body, our jasad. And our body is something that we can physically perceive. Okay. Our ruh is something we cannot physically perceive. Okay. But though we are acknowledging its effects. Okay. And the two physical mediums that we have that allow our soul to engage with our body is our physical heart and our brain. Okay, these are the two physical entities that do that. So this is Imam Ghazali's model of the self. Now, the mind in particular, okay, we recognize that the ruh, the mind, the soul has an impact on our mind, and the body has an impact on our mind. So we understand to some degree the physiological processes that occur that impact our mind. So we take certain drugs, it affects our mind. We take alcohol, intoxicants, it'll affect our mind. We will, be in a certain environment, it'll affect our mind because, there may be certain intoxicants in our environment, or there are just social intoxicants and not just physical intoxicants that will affect our mind. Okay, so there are events that occur which affect our mind. So these things clearly happen, but we don't really understand how the soul affects our mind. That's important because our soul does affect our mind. Okay, and this is a very important aspect of our understanding of the Islamic tradition. Okay, so we recognize there are 5 external senses and there are also internal senses. The 5 external senses are, number 1, how the external world that we're living in affects our mind, which I just talked about briefly. Then we also recognize that we perceive that through our taste, smell, touch, sight, and hearing. Okay, so Imam Ghazali explains that other than that, there are 5 internal senses. And he describes that as the ability for us to process knowledge, analyze it, and store it. Okay, so that's a sense. Okay, and also we memorize things, that's hifz, think over things, we ponder over things, tafakkar, recall things, tazakkar, imagination, takhayyul, and we have a sense of joint sense perception, al-hiss al-mushtarak, and so forth. So he talks about a number of different things that are internal senses as opposed to just external senses. Okay, so This is important because what this is doing is it's defining how our relationship is with our environment in the sense of how we perceive it and how we acknowledge it and how we gain an understanding of it. The soul is something which is of the unseen because the only way we understand the soul is through its effects, number one, and also through wahi, revelation, because the revelation is telling us that we have a soul. And it also makes reference to certain terms which describe the roles of the soul. So one is the soul, which is a ruh, which is a metaphysical spiritual substance, and it's the essence of life. In its empirical study, we can't really have a tool or some kind of, imaging or visual sort of ways of recording the soul in any form or manner or measuring the soul. But we can't its impact, okay, like the effects of the soul has in terms of your emotions and so forth. The heart, the qalb, which is also a metaphysical spiritual entity, and this is about knowing and perceiving. Okay, so this is the role of the soul in that sense. Then we have the intellect, the aql. So this is why man's nature of true nature of things, they arise on the basis of their aql. So this is the power that you have, the quwwah, the power that you have to perceive and know. And then we have the self, the nafs, or another way of saying that your ego, the metaphysical spiritual element of animalistic blameworthy qualities. So this is the animalistic element of us. So you find animals, they don't. A lion will see a deer, and it won't just think to itself, "Oh, how cute that deer is," and so forth, and contemplate over. It'll just realize it's food. That's sufficient for it, and it'll just pounce because it has this animalistic sort of innate nature that these are things that it would do because that's part of its nature as an animal. But we also have those animalistic elements in us, like we do with food. So we have that's an animalistic sort of component. Sexual drive is an animalistic sort of element that we share with other animals. Okay, right. So this is an important discussion. Now, there's what we call conflicts in the heart, or the qalb. So if you look at the soul, okay, there are two components that of our soul. That are basically the conflict. So we look at the soul, we're looking specifically at the qalb, the heart. Okay, this is not the physical heart, this is a spiritual heart. Okay, and in there you have aql, which is our ability to reason and the strength that we have in reasoning. And then we have the nafs, which is our ego. Okay, so this is the animalistic element. Now, Imam Ghazali explains that in this sense, you have what we call siyasatul qalb, politics of the heart. So what happens is that all of us undergo this particular process. So in our qalb, the spiritual heart, we have our aql, which tries to reason things through. And the thing that really allows us to do that well is ilm, knowledge. If we have the knowledge of the Sharia is telling us what is the right thing to do, what is the wrong thing to do, what is considered as a blameworthy or praiseworthy act, or thought even, or a belief even. So the aql manifests that, okay? And then at the same time, we have our nafs, or our ego. And our ego is something that thrives on things like animalistic elements in our nature. So it thrives on food, okay, sexual passions, desires for sort of gain of things, which are, in essence, of value to our physical nature in terms of gaining pleasures. Okay, very focused around hawa and pleasure. The things that we gain pleasure from, okay, are normally embedded within our nafs. And those are physical pleasures, not sort of spiritual pleasures, which is a separate discussion. So our aql, in essence, plays an important role of manifesting that knowledge that we, the ilm that we have, guiding us through the processes, okay, giving us this ability to reason through properly and, act according to the Sharia. Whereas our nafs is something that does quite the contrary. It actually is something that, is thrives on pleasures and desires. Okay, so these two elements, the aql and the nafs, are at constant loggerheads with each other.
and you have one which may dominate the other. So if the nafs dominates the aql, so you have, the makeup of, ourself, our model of ourselves, where our nafs dominates our aql, that in us, this is a state of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention in the Quran, nafs al ammara bisu. So this is the nafs that we have, which is in essence spiritually unwell. This is a state of spiritual sickness. Okay, these kind of individuals have spiritual illnesses in them, where they have greed, or they may have, for example, jealousy. They may have elements of anger in them. They may have elements of miserliness in them, and pride, in particular, pride and arrogance. These are elements you will find in those kind of individuals, because they constantly feeding their animalistic sort of elements, and less so, the praiseworthy elements of akal and reasoning and attaining this accord where they associate with Allah and their deen. Okay, so then you have a state where they can be such that they sort of are equal in their battle. Okay, so the nafs and ego, sometimes akal sort of supersedes, sometimes not supersedes, but they're sort of in this flux all the time. So this is called nafs al-lawama. So like this is sort of a state of blameworthiness to some degree, but in essence, it's a stage which is an intermediate stage. This is the stage that we're expected to achieve. Okay, this is our goal, where our akal grows and supersedes our nafs. In other words, what we do is we refrain from those things that grow our nafs, okay, and feed our nafs. So that is, controlling passions, okay, covetousness. So in other words, like for example, fasting. Okay, كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. Fasting has been prescribed upon you like it was prescribed on those before you, so that you can attain taqwa. And when you attain taqwa, what you've done is you shrunk your nafs and enhanced your aql, because the ilm has grown and the nafs has shrunk. And hence, you have the capacity to refrain from sin. You have the capacity to connect with Allah at a greater sort of measure. Okay, so this is a state of what we call nafs al-mutma'inna, content soul, okay, a content nafs. And that's what we want to achieve. For us, it's not about maximizing pleasure or happiness, but for us, it's about maximizing contentment, okay, in Allah's decree. So if we are constantly searching and running after pleasures and happiness, we're going to fall off the cliffside, because that's not what this dunya is about. The dunya will give you temporary happiness and pleasures. You will chase after money, for example, and you will gain a temporary happiness from that. And then you realize that this is not what I'm after. So like the Prophet ﷺ indicated that, man is weak. Even if they were given a mountain full of mountain Uhud full of gold, they would ask for more, because they'll never gain that sense of contentment, because they're constantly searching for pleasure and not necessarily the most important thing, which is itminan, which is contentment. Okay, so now using this model, I will pause at a certain stage, and I will allow you to ask questions. So using this model, I have labeled this as type 1, type 2, type 3. So we got the dominant faculty is the nafs, or nafs versus reason, or aqal. Okay, so and the state of the heart is nafs al-amara, nafs al-lawama, nafs al-mutma'inna. And in those situations, for example, you may have intentions which are purely selfish. So somebody who has a nafs, a huge nafs, okay, and an aqal which is strong, that is usually through a state that the environment has in essence driven you to. This is our acquisition of the environment, the effects of the environment that you're in, the knowledge that you've gained has impacted you in that sense. So you're living in a materialistic society, which is individualistic and secular. So there's a lot of skepticism about Allah and so forth. yeah, on the elements of unseen, you live in that kind of society, then it's all going to be, for you, it's going to be more about animalistic wants, okay? Individualism. You have more inclined to a purely selfish sort of outlook, okay? And hence, on the basis of that, there's a greater inclination to your actions becoming immoral, okay, from a Sharia perspective. So these are basically kabir a'mal, actions that are immoral. Then the second element, we'll go to the third one, then I'll come to the second issue. So look at type 3. This is about where the aql is enlarged. This is knowledge, acting upon knowledge, using that as a form of guidance for you, having control of your nafs, being, this is about self-management. And even in leadership language, we talk about this we use words like emotional literacy, where a person has a good understanding of themselves, a self-reflection, they can self-manage themselves, and hence on the basis of that wisdom allows them to have some kind of reflection about their relationship with others, and therefore they can manage other people better. Yeah, so that ability is more in line with nafs al-mutma'in. Okay, so this is in essence a state where you have a sense of content. Yeah, and those kind of individuals are more inclined to altruistic behavior. There's a sense of confidence. There's a sense of content. Ya Allah, you have given me sufficient, what I need. I am content in the little that you have given me. Okay? And that suffices me. Your intentions become more pure, your sincerity becomes more pure, and you're more inclined to altruistic behavior. Okay? And that is more moral inclinations. So you see that there is a greater inclination towards a fitra state, because our fitra state is this state, nafs al-mutma'inna. Okay? Right. So let's just go over one or two more slides, and then we'll talk a bit about other elements here. So we have look at nafs al-amara again, because this is where so nafs al-amara, if you remember here, is the nafs al-lawama is like a flux between selfish altruistic behavior, which unfortunately most of us are in. Okay. Having said that, let's focus on nafs al-amara. And because if we're looking at therapy and psychotherapy, then this is what we need to work on. So you have the lower extreme of nafs al-amara, which leads to cowardliness. Okay. And you may have a higher extreme of nafs al-amara, which is aggression. So there are two elements of opposites. Okay. And if you were to balance this and reach a state of mutma'inna, then what you have is cowardliness, which is one end, aggression on the other. And if you bring a balance between the two, then it brings a sense of courage, makes you courageous. Okay. And you have individuals who are courageous, that has quite an impact in terms of their makeup and who they become. People who become very principled in their ways, and they have a sense of courage to maintain those principles. You may have one extreme, which is miserliness. Okay, I have the other extreme, which is extravagance. So what happens is extravagance is a sickness in itself. So what you do is you fall at the balance between the two. And if you fall at a balance between the two, that becomes generosity. Okay, so you become somebody who's generous, somebody who recognizes their means, and they're not extravagant, at the same time they're not miserly. Or you may be timid, okay, passive, timid, and there's another element on the other end, which is too self-confident, okay, or overconfident, yeah. And what you want is something that's in the middle. The sense of balance would require, they have a sense of dignity, at least, yeah. Then you have an insensibility or hypersensitivity, and then you have a sense of a middle approach, which is temperance. So, for example, phobias, anxiety issues make people sensitive or hypersensitive, and so their shift is towards the higher extreme, which is an element of the nafs al-amara. Okay, right. So there are certain influences there are three things that influence us when we are vulnerable because we have a state of nafs al-ammar. Okay? Number one is hawa. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَحْكُمْ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ بِالْحَقِّ وَلَا تَتَّبِعِ الْهَوَىٰ فَيُضِلَّكَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Judge each other in truth. فَحْكُم بَيْنَ النَّاسِ بِالْحَقِّ وَلَا تَتَّبِعِ الْهَوَىٰ, and do not follow your desires. Do not follow desires. فَيُضِلَّكَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, because it will misguide you from the path of Allah. So your desires and animalistic elements of your nafs will drive you to shameless acts, wickedness, wastefulness, hypocrisy, defamation, greed, flattery, envy. Okay? So Imam Ghazali explains there's another element, which is ghadab. Ghadab can be sometimes even a rebellious behavior. So if you look at Shaitan Iblis, when he was asked to prostrate before Adam alayhi salam, and that was an instruction from Allah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ أَبَى وَاسْتَكْبَرَ وَكَانَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. So when we told him to prostrate, the angels prostrated, except for Iblis. So Allah says, Aba, yeah, he became rebellious. Wastakbara, he became arrogant. So this is kibr. So this is a sense of his nafs grew. So there was a sense of rebellion first, a sense of rebellion and anger. Why? Yeah, and then a sense of wastakbara, arrogance. It fed it into his nafs. Yeah, and then as a result of wakana min al-kafirin, and he became of the disbelievers. In other words, his reasoning became faulty now. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked him, why did you do that? Yeah. So his response was, Ana khairu min, I am better than him. Yeah. So khalaqtani min nar wa khalaqtahu min teen. That you created me from fire and you created him from clay. I am better than him. Yeah. So that's faulty reasoning. Imam Ghazali even explains this in his Qistas al-Mustaqim. He says that is faulty reasoning because of the state of his nafs, yeah, his arrogance. So he wasn't able to reason properly because of that. And if he had, truly allowed for the authority of Allah to command him and just follow Allah, just solely on his instructions, because he had arrogance, that was a barrier for him to do, and hence faulty reasoning. But rather, he would have realized that fire destroys and clay gives life. So clay is more superior. Fire can just destroy. Clay gives life. And to give life is a much greater deed. Yeah. So he would have appreciated that. But anyway, the main point is, so anger, which is usually a form of rebellion to some degree, okay, leads to rashness, squandering, boasting, hot temper, pride, conceit, snaring, disregard, despising, and lust. And then you have shaitan-led, which is waswasa. Yeah, so we make dua. So Allah says, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ مَلِكِ النَّاسِ إِلَهِ النَّاسِ مِنْ شَرِّ الْوَسْوَاسِ الْخَنَّاسِ, from the waswas, the whisperings of the khannas, those shayateen that come and go, and they whisper into our hearts and into our ears, and they embody and embed seeds in our heart that leads to guile and deceit and craftiness and cunningness and deception and violence and fraud and mischief. These are the three elements of influences that have an effect on us and affect us in that balance, and we're more vulnerable to that when we are in a state of nafs al-amara. So when you're in a state of nafs al-amara, where your nafs is big and your aql is shrunk, in that sense, you are more easily led by these elements, okay, or these levels of influence. Okay, so I will, if anybody has any questions, I'll allow people to speak. If anybody wants to come on, raise your hands, maybe. Okay, we got one, maybe, I think. Is it Mariam Jawad? You want to say something? Oh, Mariam. You want to come online?
No. I did not have my hand raised.
Okay, no problem. So we got Waqas Ahmed.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saab.
Wa alaikum salam. Wa alaikum salam.
Dr. Saab, I just wanted to ask you, when you are sort of struggling from waswasa, like, what's the best way to sort of counter that?
Okay, big question. I'll try to address some of it, inshallah, in the later presentation. But if you have any questions, please relate it to some of the things I've discussed now. But I will make mention of that, inshallah, later on, to some degree, anyway. Yeah, inshallah. Okay, we've got Nadia. You want to ask something?
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
The model I understood from our shiur. What is the role of emotions? Like the qalb is the seed of emotion, and the qalb, the spiritual heart. Like
Yeah.
we have like if the love of dunya in our spiritual heart, then we have in the nafs we will have desire for big house, big cars, etc.
Yes.
Right? And then our aql will plot and plan accordingly. So,
Yes.
but how do we get those emotions, right? That's my question.
Very good question, and I promise that I'm going to come back to it because I've got a little visual to explain, inshallah. So I will come back to that, inshallah.
Thank you.
Okay, inshallah. We'll take one more question. So I think it's Farmanullah.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Wa alaikum salam.
I hope you're doing well. My question to you, sir. My question to you, sir, is that you explained the Al-Ghazali model. So my question is that if a person does not know this procedure and he's on his own attempting to transform himself, so are there any other ways to do so, or one has to follow such a model? Because I myself had a spiritual transformation, but I didn't know of such model. So would you please explain that? Thank you, sir.
Well, the response to that is simple, and that is that you don't need to know about this model for you to transform or reform. Reform is a better word to use. For you to reform, you don't need to know about the model, but rather that you'll find, as we talk about some of the therapeutic ways of sort of reforming yourself, they are things that you sort of undertake anyway. And there are many examples of that in the Quran, in how you reform, doing the zikr of Allah. We'll make mention of some of those things. Like, for example, fasting is a good example. Fasting is you're curbing your desires. You are shrinking your nafs. You're enhancing your aql, yeah, in line with the Sharia, which goes back to the point that the sister was making earlier on. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentioned, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يكونوا هواء تبعا لما جئت به. None of you are true believers until your hawa, your desires, meaning that you're going to have desires, but until your desires, the things that you gain pleasure in, are not in materialistic things and those things that have no Islamic value, but rather in what I have brought to you. Yani the Sharia, what I have brought. If your desires align themselves with the Sharia, you gain pleasure out of salah, you gain pleasure out of fasting, you gain pleasure about doing the dhikr of Allah, you get pleasure from the Quran. And that is a process that you do to train yourself to become like that. And when you become like that, okay, then you will see that this is the thing that you gain contentment with. And you're searching for the happiness and pleasures in those things that are ghayrullah, that take you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then you will get issues where you will be connecting yourself to the dunya, and you're connecting yourself with your dunya, then dunya is not reliable. It's not trustworthy. Dunya fluctuates. It's out of your control. So you are attaching yourself to something which is volatile. And when you attach yourself to something which is volatile, then you will have serious repercussions. Okay, and a lot of the sort of mental sort of illnesses, depression, anxieties, and all these kind of illnesses that tend to occur are because of that reason, to some degree. Okay, so this is a very important point to sort of make, yeah, in that sense. So yeah, so from that particular perspective, it's important that there are many components of things that we're doing anyway, regardless of this model is just a theoretical model that helps us explain that we can work from. Okay, it's just, that's all it is. And there are other models which are similar, yeah, which are similar. Okay, so somebody is asking the question, why is it called animalistic? Animalistic because it coheres with what animals are like. Animals use very little aql Because they haven't been endowed with aql. They haven't been endowed with a good high-level functioning, mental functioning and cognition. Or they don't have a soul, a ruh. If they do have a soul, that's debatable. But if they don't have a soul or a ruh, or if they do have one, that in essence is of a higher functioning nature. Okay. Then there's a question, Islam. When I mention about trying to controlling your nafs, sometimes people ask how much you try to lower your nafs. They ask, should not people be happy and enjoy dunya or desires up to a point? Yeah. So there's an extreme in everything. So you need to be careful that you don't, because the dunya is like taking a ship or a boat to get from your destination from one shore to the other. You need the boat to get there. You can't swim because it's too far, it's too deep. You will not survive. If you do not take the dunya to get to your destination, which is Allah, then you will not survive. You will drown. Okay? It will be too wondrous for you, too overwhelming. You will not be able to manage it. You use the dunya for your purpose. So you guide yourself, you guide yourself through the boat, you get to your destination and you're in full control. If you're in a situation where your boat has holes because your iman has holes, or you have issues in terms of your spiritual state, then you have holes in your boat and you may drown even before you get to your destination. That's the problem. Yeah. Or you get too preoccupied with trying to shovel the water out that you don't drown. You're so preoccupied with that you actually falter from the destiny. You are misguided from the direction, or you have to take long journeys to get to there. So and that exhausts you. So there are many components. So dunya is something that that's an extreme understanding to be somebody who lets go of dunya completely. You need the dunya to get to your destination. Okay, let's move on because we're only limited by time, and then inshallah we'll take some more questions in a bit short. So what are the barriers to human spiritual progression? Okay, so that's an important question. So there are certain barriers, okay, that we need to jump over. We just need to jump over them, okay, and that requires hold back and go for the ride, and and have sabr, and you'll get over it. So this is the sort of the heavy way of dealing it. And sometimes you need shuyukh, people who can guide you through that process, will help you to get over them. Yeah, or a therapist to get over them. There are other barriers that are hidden. Okay, so they are clearly hidden, and because they're hidden, it's very difficult to know where they are and how to to grasp them or make But there are outlets. And that's about then recognizing, because now you recognize it, they become apparent to you. When they become apparent, you can sort of go to a certain trajectory. There are others where the only way to get around them is to do something quite contrary to them to get to your destination. You follow that same path, it's problematic. It's going to lead you further into the problems that you're having. Rather, you need to sort of take a slight different angle to get to your destination. These are ideas in principle, and I'll make references to how that will relate to some of the bigger questions. Okay, right. Now there are barriers which I mentioned. So there are barriers, and these are barriers that Imam Ghazali sort of mentions, but in essence they are mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah. Okay, the first is mal. First barrier, mal, your wealth. Belief of success and happiness is in your wealth. This is so shaitan will basically constantly drill this into you. Yeah, and then he'll also drill into you fear of poverty. You have multimillionaires, and their biggest fear and anxiety is that I lose my wealth. You got so much money, yeah, where you have somebody who has not even a hundredth of that amount. They don't have that level of anxiety as much as you. So the more money they have, the more anxious they become, and the greater fear they have of poverty. It's strange. So that sense of security, because they have more responsibilities with a greater level of wealth, and hence they have so they're in that situation. So wealth is a dominant sort of element. Okay, it becomes an obstacle for your human progression. You need to get over it. It's something you have to work towards, that it doesn't have that level of impact on you. Okay, so you need to gain a sense of material independence from material dependence. The other barrier is jah. Al-jah. Jah is this element of fame, wanting to be recognized as somebody who is popular, or wanting people to talk highly of you. You don't like people not talking. It's not only a natural thing that people want everyone else to talk nice of them, but this is to an extreme. So, you go out of your way, you boast, you lie, you do all those things just so that people can talk, higher of you, have a higher expectation of you than what you really are. So this is so for that reason, success and happiness is dependent. That's what is important. So you search for securities all the time, because, and in essence, this leads to lack of confidence, to be honest. People who present themselves as very confident, but reality is they don't really have confidence, and that's why they're doing that, or behaving in that way. So this is about dependence on praise and popularity. That's what you need to move away from. These are barriers. They're preventing you from progressing. And this can be problematic if some people are searching knowledge even. You have to have a sense of humility when you search knowledge, but that prevents them to gain, certain knowledge. The other is blind following or imitation, taqleed. So this is a sense of happiness through arrogance. So you sort of blind follow a certain process, or blind follow a certain culture, or a certain entity, or a way, or a people. Yeah, and you don't sort of have your own sort of activism in it. It's just passive to a blind following process. And if somebody comes in there and tries to interfere with that, then you become very resistant to that. You can be quite rebellious against it. You can, so this is, so what that is it's a search for security all the time. You want a sense of belonging into something. And that's that's more important to you. So there's a dependence on a sense of commonality. Everybody else is doing it, I need to do that. I need to fit in with the crowd. So fashions and trends that always change. You can have fashions that are negative fashions, contrary to Sharia even, and you will go by that, because there's a sense of commonality there. There's a blind following element. And the last one is quite important, is sin, ma'siyah, lack of self-control. So then you just sin. You can't control yourself. There's sinful behavior. Lack of self-motivation. You can't motivate yourself to abstain from it. So this is a dependence on pleasures usually that leads to sin. Okay. So these are 4 barriers that Imam Ghazali makes reference to. Okay. So there are shields which maintain protection, which is important. So there are shields that you can form that will maintain your protection. And the 4 shields are, it's interesting because one is, what you're doing here in essence in all these elements is you are doing 2 things. You are curbing your nafs. So you are starving your nafs, is another way of saying it. You're sort of starving your nafs so that you can control it. Okay, and at the same time, your aql will grow because you are nurturing your aql. So hunger doesn't. Now, hunger doesn't mean going to an extreme of hunger. It means that you're receptive to a softened heart and brightens the heart. So what that means is that you control your intake. Okay, by controlling your intake, in essence, that is in a sense controlling a certain desire. Okay, so why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it haram for us to eat, which is we have a clear desire for, in the month of Ramadan? It's something clearly halal, and Allah's made it haram in Ramadan during the day. And these are things we, if we don't eat, we don't drink, we die. So that's how important it is. But yet it is made haram in Ramadan because it's there to curb your desires. Okay, so wakefulness, okay, is another thing. So sahar, in other words, jo. Sahar, clear mirror. So what happens is this state where you don't sleep all the time. So laziness and ghafla and heedlessness and all these elements exist in people who spend a lot of time sleeping. Okay, but rather those people are astute who spend less time sleeping and more time with activities. Okay, so you need to be much more active and not spend too much time sleeping and this laziness. So what that happens, it clears the mirror for you. Okay, when it clears the mirror, the truth sparkles in it and it connects with the akhirah. You have a realization of the unseen. So you need to get out of that fog, which is about haziness and, you know, being too preoccupied with laziness, which is about sleep. Another is silence. I mean, some of us struggle with this samat, yeah, which is basically silence. So it's virtue. It's a virtue to remain silent. You know, you don't have to talk. So, you know, and you know, being in solitude it becomes easier. It inclines towards more dhikr and fikr, you know, contemplation. Enhances the intelligence and enhances piety when you do that. Those people who have to talk all the time and, you know, they have to be engaged with conversation, their tongue will slip and they will sin. They will lie, they will cheat, they will backbite, they will, you know, and they're more prone to doing that. And hence they will refrain less from dhikr and, you know, those sort of attributes. So silence is another important sort of protection. Solitude is another one. So this is about regulates your hearing, your vision. So so look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He went to you know, Mount Hira, okay, and there he spent time away from the dunya. So sometimes solitude is a virtue, yeah, being you know, in solitude, you know, refraining from wider society. So even if you go to a masjid, you recognize, even though the masjid is crowded, it's a place of solitude because it's about you. You don't go there to engage with other people whilst you're on the musalla. When you're out of the musalla, you're out of the masjid, then you do. Yeah, that's fine. But when you're on the prayer mat, you don't. Okay, so it's a form of solitude. And i'tikaf is another example. Doing i'tikaf, that's the idea there. So you can already see that these are very, very important shields which maintain protection regarding your nafs and so forth. And remember, we said we were going to talk about this slide. So here, in this slide, you will see, you know, in terms of bad and good behavior, there's a sense of pleasure that we get that leads us towards bad, and there's a sense of discipline that leads us towards good. And inwardly, what we do is then we become reliant on the divine. We become reliant on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Once our reliance on Allah increases more and more and more and more, because we've disciplined ourselves, that is a virtue. And if you are inclined towards pleasure, then you become reliant on the physical means, and that is problematic because physical means are not things that you should rely on. Okay. Now, as an add-on to this, you see, we talked about hardship and pleasures. So if we look at this state, that we're recognizing that if we want to move from this state of fitrah, then we have to undergo hardship, we have to persevere with this, and we'll then gain pleasure. So when I said, like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "La yu'minu ahadukum hatta yakunu hawa'an tab'an lima ji'tu bi." None of you are true believers until your desires align themselves with the Sharia, which is what I have brought you. In other words, it requires you to get through that process, some hardship, perseverance, and then you will gain the pleasure from that. Okay, because your hawa will align itself with the Sharia. So in terms of hardship, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ وَإِنَّهَا لَكَبِيرَةٌ إِلَّا عَلَى الْخَاشِعِينَ. Seek help with steadiness and prayer, though this is hardship. Yeah. إِنَّهَا كَبِيرَةٌ, it's hardship for anyone but the humble. إِلَّا عَلَى الْخَاشِعِينَ. Those who are humble, who nafs has shrunk, and they'll, you know, they will benefit from this. In terms of how it supports them in the sense of perseverance and sabr. Okay, and then there is a mention, عُبِدَ اللَّهَ عَلَىٰ رِضَاهُ فَإِن لَمْ تَسْتَطِعْ فَفِي صَبْرٍ عَلَىٰ مَا تَكْرَهُ خَيْرٌ كَثِيرٌ. So here the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, worship Allah with pleasure, and if you cannot, then with perseverance. Well, perseverance is something which you dislike, contains much good in it. So even if you don't gain pleasure in your salah, what you do is you still do it, because that becomes a sense of obedience, and in that obedience you persevere, and when you persevere in that obedience, that is immensely rewarding, inshallah. So then you have Anas radiallahu anhu mentions the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَجُعِلْتُ قُرَّةَ عَيْنِي فِي الصَّلَاةِ. Yeah, Rawah Ahmad. So he basically says that the prayer has been made, وَجُعِلَتْ قُرَّةُ عَيْنِي فِي الصَّلَاةِ. So he's saying that the prayer has been made the delight of my eyes. Yeah, and hence that sense of pleasure will come from these acts of worship and so forth. Anyway, so this is the important thing to notice. So here, let's say we got miserliness and arrogance. So what we do is, this is the fitrah state. So they moved away from that through habituation, acquisition. The idea there to overcome that is to give to others. You give to others, make it a habit, and give it charity. So in other words, you struggle doing it, but yet persevere, give to others, and start doing this. Okay? Imitate people of modesty. If you're arrogant, imitate people of modesty and humility. Imitate them. At least do that. And that will happen. That will be a sense of habituation there. And then put yourself in an environment that really nurtures that. Learn about virtues of charity, gain the ilm, the knowledge, build your aql, be in the company of those who are charitable, and remove that element of nafs. So when you start doing that, your environment, through the education and company that you're, then you will see a sense of generosity developing in you. Okay? Learn about what is humility. Be in the company of those who have humility, and shun arrogance. You start doing that, and then you'll gain a sense of humility. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, be with the truthful people, the righteous people. Be in their company, because they are the people who will impact you. Okay? So that requires a sense of hardship to get there. Okay? But when you get there, okay, through that environment that you share with these individuals, then you gain pleasure from this. Or contentment. So loves good deeds and hates bad deeds. Okay, so this is an important sort of part of that. Now, this is a kind of a task, and because of the limits of time, we haven't got much time to go over it, but I'll just make mention of this. So maybe, if not now, at least think about it. Spend about 5 to 10 minutes thinking about an act of yours, and I really want you to think about this. Spend about 5 to 10 minutes thinking about an act of yours which you repeat a lot, and it is not seen favorably in Islam. For example, listening to music, not wearing the hijab, intermingling with opposite gender, backbiting, lying. Okay, think about that. Then ask yourself, how clear are you about whether it is sinful? That's the first question you need to ask. And how willing are you to be told it is? Are you likely to give resistance to that? If it was, are you going to explain it away? Say something about how you're giving in to something that, even if it's doubtful, you would still, incorporate that within your life, or you struggle with that, so this is important. How frequently are you exposed to this, or how frequently do you do it? So this is another thing that you need to ask yourself. And then finally, can you live without it? And you need to ask yourself that as well. So these are things that clearly are a sense of hardship. Yeah. So these are the processes you have to go through when you're undergoing that hardship, and then that perseverance. So we're going to go to beliefs, perceptions, and behavior. This is the bit that we talk about when we talk about emotion. So this is how somebody looks to you. What others see about you. They see a behavior and action. All they see is the outwardness of you. Okay? But in there's many things going on. There are beliefs, values, and perceptions that you have. Now that needs to align with the Sharia. There are certain thoughts and expectations. So those beliefs and values and perceptions lead to thoughts, lead to certain thoughts and expectations which align with those beliefs and perceptions. Okay? Which those thoughts and expectations lead to emotions that align with those thoughts and expectations. Yeah? And with those emotions, you have behaviors and actions that align with those emotions. So in other words, if you work on this, beliefs, values, and perceptions, that will impact your thoughts and expectations, it'll affect your emotions, and it'll affect your behavior and actions. And that's what you need to work on. You change your behaviors and actions through managing your emotions. How do you do that? Through developing your thoughts and expectations. How do you do that? By shifting your beliefs and perceptions towards that which the Sharia has clearly aligned. Okay? And inshallah, you'll see things change. And this is what you need to do. This is the ideal model of how you change a person in terms of how they have resilience. Yeah? You change their beliefs, values, and perceptions to one which is conducive with Islam. So going back to that description I talked about, how living in a society which is capitalist, liberal, and secular, we become materialistic, you become individualistic, you become skeptical, and as a result of those three things, our beliefs and values and perceptions are distorted. When they are distorted, they will distort our thoughts and expectations of what we want from our life, what we should want from other people, how we advise others, how we advise ourselves. And on the basis of this, that will impact our emotions. Because if they're not in line with the Sharia, clearly they're going to have an impact with you in your emotional state. And if that's the state, then clearly your behaviors and actions will align with them. Okay, so this slide just defines them. What is a belief, what is a thought, and what is a... So I'm not going to go into the details of this slide, inshallah, but I'll leave that to you. So here, this is what others don't see but can deduce, okay? And this is the thing. So you can see if you shift your beliefs and values to one that is good, and you'll develop, manage, and change, and hence you will become quite a different product. And let me just see if there's any questions anybody has. And if anybody wants to speak, you can come online.
Can you listen to me, sir?
Yeah. Is that Farman? Yeah, okay. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, I noticed a contradiction that is basically in perspective of Islam and science. That is about sleep pattern that you mentioned. So my question to you is, sir, that sleeping less is being recommended in Islam, while on the other hand, science promotes that a person has to take adequate sleep.
Yeah.
So what's your take on this, sir? There is a clear distinction. There is a clear contradiction. How would you explain that, sir?
Okay, so from a Sharia perspective, you have a situation where you're looking at science. Science has too many variables for you to really give a determinate answer on that, for a start. I'm from a science background. So, the cohort that you are assessing in terms of sleep patterns, how much sleep they're having, and how that's impacting their heart disease probability in the future, or stroke, or various other things. I know there's a correlation that those people who sleep less, okay, there's a greater correlation in terms of their incidence of having heart disease, heart attack, strokes, and various other things like that. Diabetes even, whatever. Now, there are too many variables there, because people who sleep very little, maybe there are many underlying reasons why that is. Is it because, they're depressed? Is it because they have anxieties that affects their sleep? There are many, many variables, okay, that could lead to. Somebody's of sound mind and a healthy mind, and they sleep a reasonable amount. Now, sleeping less is not something, I don't mean by that sleep for 4 hours, but rather, as I remember from the scholars of 𝐁𝐚𝐥𝐚𝐿, they talk about gradually working up to sleeping, in a sound mind. Clearly, if you're suffering from wakefulness and all sorts of other issues, then you're more prone to have heart disease and things like that in the future, because you've got anxiety issues. Okay, and then hence your sleep patterns are like that. Or you force yourself to sleep very little because you're so busy with a working life, it's so heavy for you. Yeah. So there's a lot of variables that sort of can distort the reality of that. But anyway, the main thing is that 6 to 8 hours is the recommended time from what we hear from scholars who are heavily working on this idea of 𝐁𝐚𝐥𝐚𝐿. They say anything more than 8 hours is problematic. So you should bring it down to 8 hours, from 6 to 8 hours, depending on your temperament.
So 6 hours overall means that there is a kind of Kalula and there is a nap prior to Fajr. So overall 6 hours or 6 hours?
Kalula is a different thing, because Kalula is not supposed to be a state of deep sleep. Kalula is a rest. A person rests for about 20 minutes. Kalula, people misunderstand. Kalula doesn't mean you go have a good sleep for a couple of hours. Kalula is 20-minute rest. You just relax for 20 minutes. If it so happens that you go into a light sleep, then that's fine. So Kalula is misunderstood. Okay. Okay. Anybody?
Okay, sir.
Any other?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay,
I
no
took it.
problem. No problem, sir.
Dr.
Uh,
Saab, just wanted to
yeah,
ask
no
you,
problem. Yeah.
how do you
Yeah,
get
go
rid
ahead.
of the shaitan-led influence?
You're talking about waswasa.
Just, the slide that you brought up earlier.
Yeah. Okay.
There's one part where it says shaitan-led influence.
Yeah. So
On
the
the
idea there.
yeah.
So what
yeah,
we'll do is
sorry.
we'll talk a bit about it through this, because you're talking about a very specific area, okay, which is not the remit of this session, because you're talking about having waswasa. Now waswasa can lead to a number of different sort of
No, I'm just asking because there's obviously the three types of influence, like desires, anger-led, and shaitan-led. So
yeah.
all three, what's the best way to sort of challenge them or counter them?
So they vary with different people, but generally speaking, I'm just trying to go back in the slide. Just 1 second. I'm struggling a bit here with the slides. Just bear with me a second. Yeah. Okay. Right. Let's go back to that slide.
Because I'm not.
I know which one you do. Yeah, I know which one you're referring to. So this one, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So here, so there's a desire-led approach. Okay, desire-led here. Usually the approach there is to, if you go back to this slide, see, the desire-led approach, you just what you do is you just there's three approaches to it, right? So one approach is, if you're desire-led, there's one way to deal with it. You do other things that are more halal, and you allow you to ventilate those desires in those areas that are halal instead of which is haram. Okay, that's the approach. The other approach is you just work on it. You undergo a hard form of hardship to get over it. So that's one approach. That's another approach. The other is that you recognize it's quite concealed. It's not easily visible. So what you do is there are other alternate ways that you deal with it, recognizing what elements of that it is that's affecting you, because it's difficult to know. It's a complex one. In that situation, what you do there, the zikr, azkar, there are many other things that you do to overcome that. Now, when you come to this bit here, which is what you're referring to, let's have a slide go. Okay. So, when it's desire-led, you might want to go over the hurdle. So here, this may be, you undergo hardship. So, fast, do something which overcomes the desire quite intensively, So there is a program in how you would deal with that. Remember, these are therapies that we're looking at. When it comes to anger-led elements, then there's an approach to that. So there may be an element of dhikr, there may be an element of working on the internal mechanisms of your perceptions and beliefs. Anger is normally led by perceptions and beliefs. A lot of the time, this could be, like I mentioned before, down to issues related to rebellion. So there may be something historically in their rebellious nature that's making them angry quite a lot. Shaitan-led, okay, shaitan-led is usually something, clearly what you need to do is you need to refrain from shaitan. So zikr, azkar is a common approach when it's shaitan-led. Zikr, azkar, okay, and then in relation to that, depending on the act that you're doing, which is shaitan-led, then there are certain programs that you find scholars give to overcome them. And that's usually cautionary things, prevent yourself from being in that situation so it doesn't happen to you. So shaitan can't influence you in those situations. Being in the company of people, so you can't do things when you're on your own that shaitan can lead you on. Being in the company of pious people as much as possible, so that shaitan cannot have an influence on you when he's whispering to you. Those kind of things. So those are the sort of normal things that are prescribed in that kind of situation.
Doctor, am I right in saying that it's about identifying your own thoughts and desires and then challenging them?
Yeah, that's one approach, challenging them, but it's sometimes very difficult to challenge shaitan. So what you do is you avoid situations where you are vulnerable to shaitan.
Right, okay.
So you try to, yeah. So, I find that when I'm on my own, when there's nobody in the home, that's when I do it. Or something along those lines. You get whispers from shaitan. So avoid doing that. So that this is because shaitan whispering is very powerful. you know. And it's, you know, there's a barrier we have, and that is we use dhikr and azkar, but also we try to avoid being in those circumstances where shaitan makes us vulnerable, or we are vulnerable to shaitan.
To start off with, is it all about identifying?
Yeah, there is a sense of identification as well. Yes, yes. Okay, I'm very limited in time, so I'm just going to spend a very bit of time just talking about depression due to marital problems, anger management issues, and anxiety due to children. I mentioned a bit about anger management already. Marital problem, depression due to marital problems. Okay, let's go back. Okay, let's go back. You know, a lot of this is down to beliefs, values, and perceptions. What is marriage? What is marriage? What is marriage for you? What is the Islamic worldview? What is the Islamic tradition? Why does it emphasize marriage? What is the purpose of marriage? We've lost our purpose in marriage. We don't understand why we're married. We don't understand what the purpose of our marriage is. So we live in a society which is liberal. It's about individualism. It's about, you know, ventilating your passions and your desires. So marriage has become about lust. It's become more about attraction, sexual attraction. It's become about physical attraction. That's what marriage has become. And when you are investing in something like that, which is frail in essence and volatile, you're going to have problems. Okay, if you recognize marriage as something much more than that, okay, so that's a given, but you recognize marriage much more than, and it's about, you know, building your family. It's about building an infrastructure, a firm basis for you to now nurture your children in, building a whole framework of a societal unit, and you contributing to that. Yeah. And if you see marriage beyond that, it no longer becomes about you. Marriage becomes about her or him, your partner. Marriage becomes more about our children. Marriage becomes more about our parents and how we will care for them when they are old, because we are strong as a firm unit. My wife, we're happy together with our children. We'll work together to support our parents. Marriage becomes about building ties. Marriage becomes about what we call salah raham. Yeah, there are many ahadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, spend time tying your bonds with your family. Yeah, this is a very virtuous act. At the moment, I'm teaching Adab al-Mufrad, which is a kitab of Imam Bukhari, and the first few chapters all about the obligations that we have towards our parents, the obligations we have to family members, the obligations we have to relatives. So Imam Bukhari has placed these elements of immense virtue as important factors related to our character. So when you realize this is what marriage is about, then your beliefs, values, and perceptions will change in line with that. Your thoughts and expectations, you will overlook issues, negative issues in your relationship, because you have higher goals. You have more important priorities to meet in that relationship. It's not just about, is she giving me my rights? Am I giving her her rights? It goes beyond that, okay? And that clearly will have an impact on your emotions, yeah? You have greater level of resilience, and then hence your behavior and action. So you'll be less repulsive to that individual, attacking, aggressive, and so forth, because your behavior will be nice. It'll be more sort of, it'll pacify when it needs to be pacified. Okay. And, it'll be more conducive to a more sort of communal type relationship. Okay. So that's where those issues will arise. Otherwise, everything becomes problematic. Even the minor things become problematic. You've not been fed one day and you lose it. Yeah. So anger management is the same kind of thing. So anger management is, what is it that's causing that? So you got spiritual illness. Your nafs is big. You got big ego. Yeah. Why are people talking to me like this? I'm something. Who do they think I am? I'm something more than that. Why? Who do they think they're better than me? So you got certain perceptions about yourself and how you feel people should be with you. And those are beliefs and values and perceptions. Islam teaches you have humility. Live in the world like nobody owes you anything. Yeah. And you just give. Have that. That's your life. You are a person who gives. And that's a great blessing. Do you want to be somebody who is dependent on others? Or do you want to be somebody who others are dependent on you? You give. Give, give, give. That's the way you should live. You should not think of others giving you. Don't be dependent on others giving you. That's a certain belief or perception. You become like that, then your thoughts and expectations are different. Then your emotions are different. And that will impact your, in terms of how you get angry about certain things, for example. That's the same thing with anxiety. You've got children's concerns. Then you realize here again, that what is the bigger goal? The bigger goal is there are so many things I can do. As long as I nurture my children along Islam, I recognize there are certain things that are out of my control. I have no control over those things. They are all in taqdeer. They are qadr of Allah. I will be questioned only on those things I have control over. I will just nurture them and bring goodness in my children. And whatever happens after that is Allah's doing. And Allah always brings khair. Allah's doing is only to test. Testing me, testing my children, testing others. And that is the dunya, that's what it's for. So then if you have that understanding, then the thoughts and expectations will be different in terms of life events with your children. Your emotions will be more resilient. And hence your behavior and actions will be different. So you see, this is about really nurturing this element. It goes back to that same early discussion that we talked about, which is that model about nurturing the nafs in this sense, that we are able to achieve a state where our nafs is clearly within our reach, in that sense. So, this is what we're trying to achieve, inshallah. Okay, I recognize I've gone well over time. I'll try to answer one or two questions, inshallah. So, where are we? Okay, just 1 second. So I got a question here. If I can move this around. Okay. Islamic psychology. Sorry, I am speaking about anger perspective. Yeah. Anger management. Anger management, I just mentioned something about that already. May I ask how long it is? Okay, the webinar's overrun, yeah. Secular relationship coaching has become quite toxic. Yes. The models that we use to, the therapies that we're using, which they're all secular models, problematic for Muslims. They don't touch the areas that we need to touch, because Muslims have a very resilient nature if they follow the Islamic model. We're using a different sort of model, and we're treating Muslims on the basis of that model. So clearly there's problems there. What's the difference between hot temperament and anger? Hot temperament is much more chronic. It's more an issue which is more about your beliefs and perceptions, okay, which are more sort of long-term understandings and things that you have. And hence you got a hot temperament, and you can lose your fuse at any time. Anger can be impulsive, it can be, it can vary, and it's a symptom of hot temperament as well. Okay, so just last thing, we have a course on Balagh Academy. Okay, let me just get this. I can't seem to click on it for some reason. So, okay. We have a course on Islamic psychology and counselling, inshallah. Please go onto the link. If the admin can put up the link, for some reason I can't seem to get into the link. If the admin can share the screen of the link. Okay, there we go. So this is a worthwhile course to attend. There'll be a lot of discussion about some of these areas. Okay, I've presented a particular model, but there will be other discussions within the course that will talk about a number of different things. So it's worthwhile looking at that. There's a little video that goes with it as well. Just 1 second. So just to give you a bit of an idea about the kind of models that are normally there. So if you just go down the screen on the website. Anyway, this is a website you can tune into. But if you just go onto the screen where it gives you the different sessions, the titles of the different sessions. Just go down, further down in school. So you can see that there's an introduction to Islamic counseling psychology, the Islamic model of the self, which we talked about, and then they will explain, the different models of the self. Then something about counseling and listening skills, active listening and empathy, how you enact all this. Anger management, stress, anxiety, depression, jinn and black magic. I didn't cover that today. Tib and healthy eating, marriage and family issues, pregnancy, miscarriage, postnatal depression, understanding psychosis from an Islamic perspective, and then also reflection on the cost. So these are important things that have a great level of interest. So, do join the course, inshallah. It will benefit you immensely. And the course is for anyone. Anyone could. Level 1 is for anybody. Anybody could join the course at level 1, inshallah. So, you'll benefit from a lot of the concepts that I've talked about, plus more, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. I apologize for going over time, inshallah, and hopefully you will, register and continue to join us on this journey. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.